Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Welcome to the Backlog Battle Podcast. This is Alex. Hopefully you're having a splendid day today, wherever you may be. And in case this is the first time you've been with us on this show, we talk to gamers from all walks of life to talk about what they're passionate about and why they're passionate about games. And today, I am happy to introduce Alana Hagues. She is an editor from RPGFan, and we've been friends for 2 to 3 years now, I think.
I think so, yeah. I was trying to figure it out the other day. I was like, when did we first, because we kind of just been, swapping messages back and forth on Twitter for a few years. And I was like, I feel like before or around E3 2018 sounds about right, which would be about 3 years now, which is ridiculous to think, really. Yeah, how has it taken us this long to do this?
Probably because we needed to do a video format.
Apparently, yeah. I've never done video format stuff in my life, not with my face. So yeah, there we go. It's always the first time for everything. Yeah.
Exactly. And I'm glad you're here because, it's finally nice to be able to chat with you beyond the keyboard, beyond being a keyboard warrior, because you and I have been reviewing games for this long. I feel like we both have been reviewing games for longer than that, but knowing each other and reviewing games often sometimes in tandem, the same game. I think this is kind of exciting to have. So I just wanted to welcome you to the show again.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. This is going to be really fun, I think.
I think so too. So I always want to ask this question because I think it kind of frames who you are as a person pretty well. And of course, all our guests have answered this question. How did you get into video games?
So I'm kind of really lucky in that I've always grown up around them. So my mum played video games, and so I've got an older brother as well who's a little bit older than me. So I was immediately as soon as I could talk, walk, read, whatever, I was kind of just put in front of a console and I was just curious interested by everything my brother or my mum was playing. This is probably going to date me a little bit because I'm probably one of the younger people certainly on staff from RPGFan, but maybe around. But the very first video game I played was Sonic 3 on the Sega Genesis or the Mega Drive, and I very vividly remember just having our old CRT TV unplugged somewhere. I plugged it in on a different room so my dad could watch sports and my mum could get on with things and leave me alone, and then just put me in front of the TV and then Sonic 3 on the Mega Drive, and that was it. That was the very first thing I did on played. And I grew up mostly playing platformers, and obviously I think I'm probably most known for RPG coverage over at RPGFan. They came a few years later. First was Pokemon, but I did grow up watching my brother play FF7, FF8, Final Fantasy 9, Vagrant Story, all of those, and just kind of picked them up after him and after my mum played them and just started to get a feel for them. And that was kind of it, really. I just kind of went running with it in the early 2000s and have just never really stopped. So yeah, they've always been a part of my life, basically. I've never been able to get away from video games, even when I've had lulls in interest where I've maybe gone off to play different genres or even just gone back to replay things that I've already played. So yeah, they've forever been around.
That's really awesome. So what were the qualities of RPGs that kind of attracted you to the genre?
As a kid, I don't know. I really really my first proper RPG, we say Pokemon, but probably my first proper RPG was Final Fantasy 9. And at the time, it was just kind of the character designs, how varied they were, because Final Fantasy 9 and I guess as a couple, Breath of Fire 3 and 4 had all these really interesting casts that weren't all human. They were all a different shape, different type, different skin color, different animal at some point, all different kinds of walks of life. And that really attracted me to it. As I grew up, characters have always been the main focus, whether they're all similar or just their motivations, how they develop and how they interact with other people in the world. It's just been the thing I've been most interested in consistently since I started. So yeah, it's all evolved from FF9's very diverse cast right the way up to now, where I'm really interested in seeing how characters develop and how I relate to characters as well. I think I find that really interesting to see how people make connections with certain characters dependent on what their interests are or who they like to play as and things like that.
Yeah. And I think that's kind of like what's the most interesting thing about JRPGs is because it's not just, this plot driven kind of, storytelling that you find in a lot of them. It's also this kind of social dynamic and structure that happens because of the inherent nature of an RPG party, right? Like,
Absolutely.
Even when you think about it from a mechanical level, you have your healers, your damage dealers, and your tanks and whatnot. It's like that also describes the kind of dynamics within that party. And oftentimes, the storyline kind of reflects that as well. I do know that you're a huge fan of Skies of Arcadia.
Oh, really?
So I think this is actually the perfect segue into that series because I think it's one of those games that are unfortunately kind of lost to time in a way because like really the last time we've seen a series, and correct me if I'm wrong, but was on the GameCube when it got ported.
Yeah, 2003. Yeah. Calling it a series is very nice of you. I appreciate that.
It's true. It's only just one game. That's true. But like, I'm curious how you then found Skies of Arcadia because like that's such a unique game to discover, especially on a console like the Dreamcast. Like, did you find it on the Dreamcast? Did you find it on the GameCube? Okay.
Yeah, had it on the Dreamcast. We had a Dreamcast on release.
Wow.
Yeah, I had it from when it first released. And yeah, it's interesting because especially like I think probably viewers, listeners, everyone can tell I'm not from America. So
Yeah.
I live in the UK and we for the like certainly the 90s out and right up until really late 2000s, like our access to JRPGs in particular was pretty poor. Like it comes up on Retro Encounter, which is the RPGFan podcast I'm on most regularly. Like many games that I've played on that show, I've never played, but the main reason I've never played them is because they never came out over here, or they did, but they didn't come out until like the re-releases and stuff. Like a good example is Legend of Mana, which comes out at the end of June. That never came out over here. So this is the first time we're ever going to get it. And so, yeah, to have got something like Skies of Arcadia, which is considered a cult classic, and also it's really hard to get hold of, especially on the GameCube. Like, yeah, we just had like Panzer Dragoon Saga was another game I had as a kid that everybody else, like lots of people have never played. We don't have it anymore. We sold it. I was like, no. But yeah, to bring it back to Skies, yeah, we had a Dreamcast from day one, and so because my mum was into RPGs, she picked it up, and I remember seeing her play it one day and was just really fascinated again by. Well, actually, it's different because it's a little more bright and colorful than most other RPGs at that time.
Yeah.
Like, I know it's a bit of a cliche to say that, but like, even at Final Fantasy IX, although it's got like this like lighter exterior, it's very chipper. The music's very nice sometimes, and Skies is very, very bright. Like, it's very striking. Even if you compare it to a contemporary like Grandia 2, which is a little bit more mature, I suppose, but that immediately attracted me to it. And also, I guess, off the back of characters and being interested in characters, like a lot of Skies of Arcadia is about kind of like your own crew and your own found family, I suppose. And that's also something that I really love in stories, is like just a group of people coming together and forming their own little community. And that really resonated with me really early on. Like, even if it was just through like little side quests and things like that, where building up crew or you building up your island. Yeah, it was totally magical. Like, even the first time I played it. So yeah.
I feel bad now because I actually had never finished that game.
Hey, I don't blame you. Like, it's hard to get hold of. It's hard to fix that nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, is there a reason you didn't finish it? Was it just a time thing, or?
It was a lot of circumstances. Like, at the time I was going to college and I had like a full-time job and everything. Yeah. And worse, it was a full-time job that was also graveyard shift. So it's like, you want to talk about messed up sleeping schedule. It was literally like, like what time do I have for games at because I've mentioned before on the show where there were times where I had kind of removed myself from games because of certain circumstances beyond my control. Mm-hmm. And I think the magic of that is like coming back into video games after a long period of time. All of a sudden, like a whole bunch of games have come out, and you would hope that genres would thrive and really evolve over time. And I think that's kind of like where I was with Skies, but unfortunately, things happened. I moved and I lost my copy of Skies of Arcadia for the Dreamcast. I had an opportunity to get the GameCube version, but I thought foolishly to myself, oh, this will be easy to find later on. And and mind you, this is of course like more than a decade ago, so there was no way I would have known that this would be a cult classic at the time, because even then, like, the perception of the Dreamcast and Sega in general was that they were a dying company because of the competition with the PS2. What other games did you play on your Dreamcast? Because having Skies is pretty huge, but I would imagine you guys bought other things for that system.
So I was a big Sonic fan as a kid, so obviously I had all the 3D Sonic games. Yeah. For my sins, I suppose. Although I do still like some of them. Like, yeah, it was just a very particular time in my life, I guess. So I had those. Jet Set Radio I had, which I loved. Crazy Taxi. Power Stone. Fighting games were another big game in my series or genre in my childhood that I really, really loved to play. I just loved the intricacies of the combat. I really love learning fighting game characters. I don't have as much time to do it nowadays, sadly, but yeah, I totally love those. Soul Calibur, which was probably one of my favorite games on that system. So yeah, we had a lot of different games for it. It just happened to be lucky that Skies of Arcadia was on there as well. So yeah, it was such a cool system as well. Like the Dreamcast, I feel like it was so ahead of its time, and like it must be 21 years old this year, maybe 22 years old. Yeah, and was it 99? Was it 99.99?
It was 99.99. Yes, you're correct.
Yeah, so we had Phantasy Star Online as well, obviously.
Of course.
So yeah, everyone had that. If you had a Dreamcast and you had a wired connection to the internet, then you had that. But yeah, it was just so ahead of its time, and it really made me love Sega. Like Sega as a company, like I don't really love companies, I'll say, but like Sega have been like consistent throughout the years for me, and I've always like, even as things like Sonic kind of lose their steam, and I haven't played Yakuza, but I really respect what that RGG studio are doing, and I love seeing Sega like evolve over time and get back into this routine. It's really nice to see them a big player again, because that's the console, that's the market that I grew up in. Like a Genesis, a Sega Saturn, and a Dreamcast were like three of my first consoles. So it's just so cool to have, like, to see them grow.
Yeah. And I really highly encourage you to check out Yakuza Like a Dragon when you do get a chance, because I don't know if you heard, I mean, you only work at a video game website, but Yakuza Like a Dragon became like one of the best-selling Yakuza games of all time, which has pretty much convinced RGG that, yes, turn-based RPG genre, it's going to stay, despite people's protests, which to me, I'm kind of happy that they are, mainly because it allows them to kind of hit that reset button every time they make games, because really, you probably noticed this, that they make a game every year.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I was really surprised when Lost Judgment was, well, I don't want to say surprised, but I was expecting Lost Judgment to come out this year, but it's almost less than a year after the localization of Like a Dragon, isn't it? Because it's November and Lost Judgment is September. Yeah. And also we got like the HD collection as well over the last year. So yeah, but they've done a really good job with it. And I don't know whether they've got two separate teams working on Judgment and the mainline Yakuza series, or Ichiban now, I suppose, series. I do have a copy of Like a Dragon. I actually have a copy. I have a copy of every game because I have Game Pass, and they're all on there. So the only game I don't have is Judgment. So I will give in to protests eventually, and they're there. But they're just such a mammoth series. I can't say that though, saying as I got into Trails over the last 2 years, which is arguably a more mammoth series. So yeah, Yakuza is right up there on my to-do list.
I mean, in terms of text, like Trails is just insane, and it really is ridiculous. Like, I had introduced my wife to the series through Cold Steel because, for one, and this might sound terrible, I was using her as an experiment because I wanted to prove to people that you could still get into Trails by not going all the way back to Sky. And lo and behold, she finished 4, she finished 3, and all the way, she finished all of the Cold Steels, and she didn't bat an eye about like anything she missed. She's just like, well, this happened in other games, I'll just accept it for what it is. and we're moving on.
Yeah, I remember you talking about that with I can't remember who it was, but it was another guest on one of your other show, like previous episodes. And yeah, like I remember when Cold Steel 4 came out, there was the whole and 3. It was all the like, you have to play them in order, you have to do this. And I still haven't played 4, partially because I've played every other game except the 2 Crossbell games now. So it's just the 2 Crossbell games and 4. But it's because the protests of like, you've got to play them in order or you've got to do this. I also started with Cold Steel 1. I did Cold Steel 1 and 2 and then 3 and then went back and did Trails 1, 2 and 3. And yeah, all right, maybe I lost out on some references, but like it also makes me really curious about what's already happened. Like it just makes me want to go back and find out more. And then I'm like, oh, it like re-enriches what I've already played by finding out these old things. And like, I do understand people being like, oh, you should play them in an order. And maybe you should, but it's not the definitive way of playing it. Like you've got to find out, you know, it makes it a really hard point of entry if you want to say like you have to start either this one or this one. And it's like, that's more off-putting to me than saying like, oh, look, we'll recommend these, but you can really start wherever. Like maybe don't start with Cold Steel 2, but you know, 3 isn't a bad place to jump in. It's not the best place to jump in, but you're not like, it's still a new story arc and yeah, you'll miss out on bits, but it's always really fun to go back and like re-enrich that previous experience you've already had.
Absolutely. And that's kind of like my point. And I think the person you're mentioning is Lady Virgilia, who makes like a ton of Trails and Persona content as well, and deep dives into the psychoanalysis of some of the characters and stuff like that in some ways, which she's studying, by the way. And I think you hit the nail in the head there. And actually, in a way, the way that you describe your experience with Trails kind of reminded me of her experience as well, because I feel like she also said that she started with Cold Steel and then she went backwards and went forwards. And I think there's a value to allowing people to just experience series the way that they're comfortable with, because when you present to them on a piece of paper or on a table all 9 or so games and say, you got to play this in this order of some such, it's very daunting for anybody.
Absolutely.
Even if a series is great as it is, it's just really overwhelming to just present a whole saga and then just say you have to start over there, and without understanding what the actual person wants in an RPG that they're playing. Because you are right, like once the game has hooked you, then the curiosity comes in. That's the time when you're like, well, maybe I should play Sky. Maybe I should check out Crossbell. And I think everybody can learn from that, you know, especially when trying out a new series. So Alana, you should probably start Yakuza Like a Dragon, because it's the great introduction to the series, because it has no ties with the other 7 games before it. I'm just saying.
Yeah, don't worry. That's another one. Like, actually, it's not as bad. It's nowhere near as bad as the Yakuza, because you could probably jump in anywhere and you just have to go in and fill the blanks, but that's fine. Yeah, people on staff on RPGFan have said probably 0, 1 or Like a Dragon. It'll probably be Like a Dragon just because, you know, it's turn-based combat, all the Dragon Quest references, and I just love the sound of Ichiban and, you know, a group of like adults for a change, like you've got an adult RPG party, which is rare. And yeah, I'm just so fascinated with how that series has exploded, and I'm, you know, it's there. I'm going to do it, but it's just one of those things. Yeah.
It's quite unique. And I spoke to my friend Salvatore Payne recently, you know, where he talked about how he loved Yakuza Like a Dragon because, unlike 99.9% of the RPGs out there, the game doesn't revolve around a world-ending disaster.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's very localized. It's just, as he said, a bunch of adults trying to do adult things. Like, not like adult things, but like relatively adult things, mature things. And, well, sometimes you
I was going to say like karaoke and other things. Like
Cabaret club. Yeah.
Why not? Yeah. But I totally get that. I agree with that. And like, I do a lot of thinking about this. Like, there are so few RPGs that deal with like non-life threatening or world-ending things. Like, one of the only ones I can think of, and that's only if you like count out the entire post game, is Octopath Traveler. Like, each character is dealing with their own arc, and something bad might happen at the end of it. But without that post game, there's no threat of the end of the world or anything. It's probably just
Yeah.
like a revenge story or something like that. So it's
Mhm.
such a refreshing thing to have with the genre. And I know the original 7 Yakuza games did that, and like,
Yeah.
Like a Dragon is carrying on that. So it's cool.
It could be argued that it still happens, but at a smaller scale, right?
Yes.
Like, Kamurocho's in danger or something like that. If we're going in that route, the Atelier games kind of have a similar kind of feel to it
They
because
do.
it's just basically like, well, it's a slice of life story. It's you growing up, friendship and all these kinds of themes that have kind of permeated throughout the entirety of the Atelier series. And I'm actually really happy that I discovered Atelier through Ryza, despite the whole Thyza thing that, people, because for me, like, I never really noticed her design until people started pointing it out. Because I was just like, but she's well proportioned. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, she's a different body shape as well, absolutely. And the Atelier series is really great. And actually, all of these are like, most people in real life, like, we don't have to deal with like world-ending scenarios, but like, if something bad happens in our life, it's like it feels like it's going to affect your world, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like,
Mm-hmm.
this is what all these kind of stories are doing. Like, it's one problem in that character's life that if it's successful, if the problem happens, then it will end that character's world. So
Yeah.
it's another way of looking at it. Absolutely.
That's actually a good way of framing it. I never saw it that way. It's it's a different world-ending disaster, I suppose.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Just not like calamity on the earth, not lava's coming out of the earth, Chrono Trigger style. Like,
So, okay, I have a good question about that because, like, if you started on the Genesis, how do you circle back and then play through Chrono Trigger? How did that happen?
well, Chrono Trigger came a lot later because it was another game that didn't come out in Europe. But when quite early on in my life, after like the PlayStation 2 came out, my parents broke up and my mum had a little bit of money and she thought like, well, we're going through some stuff. So I want to go back and let my kids, or at least me, because my brother's like 6 or 7 years older than me. So he had the chance to play the Super Nintendo and the NES and stuff. She was like, I'm going to go back and buy all these old consoles. And so around the time I was playing like GameCube games and PS2 games, I was also had a Super Nintendo, a Game Gear, a Master System, an NES, and I didn't get into tons of stuff. Like, I was playing Secret of Mana maybe around 2003, 2004 for the first time. I didn't play most of the early Final Fantasies until maybe the late 2000s through ports and other things. But like, just having those old consoles, like, even though it was like 10 or 15 years after they were relevant, is like, it still felt really, really fascinating. And actually, to go back to something you said earlier, because you said like you had to take like a break from RPGs, or there was a gap, and it was like coming back was like seeing how things had developed and how things have grown. Like, in a similar way, like going back, like, because I never grew up with those consoles, like it was a chance to like experience those out of the hype. And I know that like all of these games have like, playing Final Fantasy VI for the first time, all you're going to do is look online and go, everyone's going to be like, oh, it's the best thing in the world. And I'm like, that's kind of scary, but like, it's so cool to see, like, recontextualize that criticism almost. Like, it's really fascinating to be like, okay, I'm going into this game with tons of expectations, and then you come out with similar feelings, different feelings, however you feel about it. And yeah, it was just, it's a part of my life I really treasure because I just loved having all of those consoles, and it was a really nice way to like see how things had advanced. Like, during one day I'll play, I don't know, Tales of Symphonia, and then like the next day I'll play Secret of Mana, and it's like, there's 10 years between these games. Look how far action RPGs have like developed in that time. It's really fascinating.
Yeah, and especially like taking it from a historical context, you kind of start to piece together the journey and the evolution of a whole genre. And even within that genre, you get like those subsets, right? Like you have like the action RPGs, the turn-based RPGs, SRPGs, and having that additional context must have really opened the possibilities of like what other games could be out there for you, and series as well.
Absolutely. Yeah, it really did. But yeah, I still came to so many things so much later, which always feels like a bit disappointing, but Yeah, and I'm always like frustrated with people who are like, "Oh, you've never played this before," and it's like, well, no, because why does it matter? Like, why does it matter when people
Hmm.
like experience stuff, kind of thing? Like,
Yeah.
I'm sure there's probably big series you've never played before,
Oh yeah.
and like same with me. Like, I've still never played a Wild Arms game, and I still haven't beaten Valkyrie Profile, and I've never beaten Vagrant Story on my own. I've done it with two other people, but never on my own because oh my goodness. But like,
Yeah.
yeah, like, and even like sometimes I think the way like things are changing nowadays, it's like some people don't have the time to play stuff themselves, but they'll watch like Twitch streams or YouTube playthroughs of games and they'll still fall in love with those games.
Hmm.
And they might not play them themselves at all.
Yeah.
They might play them like 6 or 7 years down the line and be like, I remember
Hmm.
this bit from this bit. And it's just
Yeah.
it's really, really cool how we've like changed how we interact with stuff and how we experience stuff at different stages of our lives.
Hmm. I think that's actually what makes video games quite a unique medium when compared to movies and TV because, yes, you can experience the game, as you said, and actually play through a game from beginning to end. Or you can go on YouTube and watch somebody actually do a full Let's Play of it and still experience, parts of the game. Like, sure, you're not controlling the characters, you're not making the builds and all this minutia, but sometimes, you have to also recognize that, people's priorities and what they look for in entertainment differ from person to person. Not everybody's going to care about the gameplay. And so maybe they just want the story, and that's totally fine. Or the interaction with other people as other people are experiencing the story, which, as you mentioned, that's what Twitch is these days. It's evoking the spirit of couch gaming in a modern era. And I find that really beautiful.
It is really fun. Yeah, like when I covered Near Replicant, one of the first things I did was went on Twitch and watch people play through it just to see their reactions. Like, I know that's a game I've played a couple of times, but even that, like just watching people experience this game that I'd played for the first time, or even people revisiting it for the first time and seeing their reactions and introducing new audiences to these games, it's just so nice to see. Like, there's so much, and I think that's like what I love about Retro Encounter, to bring it onto like one of the things that I'm regularly involved in. Like, I'm just a panelist usually. The show is run by a previous guest that you've had, Mike Solosi, and one of my favorite things about that show is having people on there who've never played that game, especially if it's, I love being that person, but I also love being the person who's played it and then watching everybody experience something I love and have different opinions, whether they love it or hate it, and they'll teach me new things about it, or they'll come to similar conclusions to me. And it's just so fun to like thrash that out with each other and discuss. So it's just, I love it.
Yeah, I've always believed that other people's opinions give you insight about your own thought process as well. And along the same lines, it's, also teaching other people, right? And kind of educating people on like, not necessarily what they should think about games, but more along the lines of like maybe bringing to light certain aspects of games that people might not pay attention to. The recent review that I made of World's End Club actually contains a very short portion where I actually talk about the creators, because I feel like for my personal experience, the whole playthrough of that entire game is inexorably tied to my history with the creators' previous games, because those people who are fans of those games are going to come into this with a certain expectation. Like, about 2 or 3 days before I started writing the script for my review, for example, I started kind of searching what people are talking about, the conversation surrounding this game. And even as recent as like 2 months ago, people were still calling World's End Club as a killing game. And I'm like, no, that's not true. And so I felt the need to educate my audience, not only who these people are and why people think this way, but what the game is with that kind of context in mind. And I think you can relate to that, especially since, my gosh, you wrote the review for Near Replicant. That must have been something.
Oh gosh, yeah. Like I that was a very conscious thing. Like, because I'd played original Nier as well. Had you played original Nier as well, or
no? Actually, Replicant's my first time. Yeah.
So you were like, I was really fascinated by like who would cover this game, because you've got people who've played Automata for the first time, and then you've got people who've played the original Nier, and then you've got people who've played either both or all of them, And then you've got people who may have played Drakengard as well.
Yeah.
And like, there's so many different slices of like people who could have played this game. And like, one of the things I wanted to know, because I played Nier and I've played a little bit of Drakengard 1 very, very long time ago. I've never beaten it. And I've played Nier Automata. And I really wanted to make sure that people like understood the differences, because there are similarities between Replicant and Automata, but
yes,
ultimately they are quite different games and they play very different, because a lot of people were going in expecting Platinum game style combat. They were expecting something narratively along the same lines as Automata, and they are similar, like to a degree, but like one thing that really stands out to me about Replicant is like it's certainly a game about people more than Automata is. Like it's about people's personal struggles, their identities, and their reactions, whereas Automata is certainly a more philosophical game dealing with concepts of what it is to be human. And those questions are in Replicant, but they're also, you know, you've got it framed by I'll try not to spoil anything for anyone listening or watching, because like you want to go into Replicant as blind as possible, really. But like it's framed by like one person losing their sister and the lengths they will go to save them, and what their friends will do as well in the similar situations. So yeah, it was such and I think that's the beauty of being a reviewer, is like one of the exciting things about it is, and I think you said this today on Twitter, which will date this recording, but when with with World's End Club, you said like, oh, one of the really nice things about reviewing a game before it releases and seeing other people's reviews is now I get to understand everybody else's opinion and see what they liked and disliked. And as frustrating as I sometimes find it to be a reviewer, that's one thing I love. Like, I love seeing what other people thought, because actually it really enriches my experience, whether they like it or not. Again, it's the same thing with like talking through games. Like, one of the first things I'll do on embargo day is go in and Google and read all these other reviews. And I'm like, oh yeah, we had this similar opinion. Oh gosh, yeah, they pointed out that thing. Oh, I'm really glad they hooked onto that, because I really like that too, and I didn't have the room to do it. And it's just it's so interesting. And yeah, I wish people saw that. And like, to come off of something else earlier, I know we're jumping around a little bit, but like the frustrating thing is like how people like perceive that. And again, I think me and you both have a similar thing. Like, we enrich our opinions by reading other people's opinions, but like many people, or a small minority of people, a loud minority of people is what I'm trying to say. A loud minority of people will read criticism, and if it doesn't line up with what they want, they are immediately very defensive, and that's kind of upsetting to me. We're lucky in that I think most of the people who interact with our work do engage with it, and I think that's really wonderful. But there's always like a little corner that's very loud that never doesn't, and it's always very frustrating to me. Like, a review is a lot more than playing a game for 25 hours and just thinking about it and writing it down. It takes, gosh, I don't know. I mean, I know video production probably takes a lot longer than me just penning it. I know, but absolutely, like, I have utmost respect, because we do some video reviews on RPGFan, but they're not done by me. And the utmost respect to the people on the video team who do such an amazing job, and to you as well, and everybody else who makes YouTube videos. Like, they do such a great job. But like, yeah, you might play a game for 30 hours, but like the drafting process and the writing process is probably 5 to 10 more on top of that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I basically, so to kind of give you an idea, like, I typically need a week if I want to really dig into a game, you know, and kind of figure out the perspective that I want to take. But also on top of that, you know, something that I kind of imposed on myself was that I wasn't going to leave the audience feeling terrible at the end of the video. And that goes for both critical reviews and also positive reviews, because to kind of take the podium a little bit, but like back when you and I actually started talking, I released a review for Fist of the North Star Lost Paradise. And the thing that happened with that I found really fascinating was, I thought that when I was writing it, that it was a fairly positive review. It was good, you know, like I said, like, it was a good game. This is despite the fact that I was only given 3 days to review the game, you know,
yeah,
a whole weekend. to build
Yeah.
and make the review, finish the game, and also write the script and everything.
Oh,
But
I've been there, yep.
then and something really blindsided me, because when the game's review actually came out, I started getting really negative comments. Many years later, looking back at that, it made me realize that the way that I finished the whole video, specifically my narration, was such a downer that people's takeaway was that I was being really too critical of the game, even though I had balanced it the rest of the way through. And so from that point onward, I vowed to basically not just rewatch videos, which I did at the time anyway, but also try to understand how the audience is going to come away with this information and what kind of feeling that they had. And so I think, not to say that written reviews don't have that consideration, but I think for such a visual, like audio visual medium as video, like considering that it's like really easy to just intake a lot of this information, the pressure is even higher.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a really great example, actually. And I think that, in the rare times that I am critical, we try and balance everything, but you don't want to like leave it off on that bad note, like you say, because I don't think that leaves anyone in a good position. Like, I feel really bad when like something doesn't do well. Like, I always want media, I always want art to be good. I always want it to be perceived well, or if it's not, I want people to get something out of it, whether it's like a video game, a film, a book, a piece of art, I don't know, or even like our work. Like, if they don't like or agree with what we've said, is there something you can pull out of it and take away and think, oh, do you know what? I've learned something today. That's like an important thing. And yeah, I think you're right though, because there's no way I can put like that positive spin as strongly in a written review. Like, I can try my best, and I try. Like, it's but it's not as easy to do. And it's a really critical skill, is like going back to your old work and like looking at it and going, oh yeah, I did that. Yeah, there's reviews I wrote 6 years ago that I don't like, but you compare them to what I do now, and everybody's in the same boat. Like, everything, we're better. We grow as people, don't we? By reviewing what we do and listening to what people say to us and taking it on board.
Absolutely. So I do want to ask, so how long have you been writing about games?
So actually, RPGFan is like the first and only place properly that I've ever done it. So since about 6 years now. It'll be 6 years in the summer, which is it's quite a long time, I suppose. I don't know what is a long time in this industry. 6 years feels like a long time to be at one place. Yeah, it's like I'm saying that and I realize who I'm talking to, and I'm like, no, don't say you've been here a long time for 6 years. Like, that is not a good thing to do. So yeah, I mean, I've always been fascinated, and like not that I didn't ever consider jumping into like journalism, because for people who don't know, RPGFan is entirely voluntary. Like, none of us get paid to do what we do. Like, we do it on our own clock, on our own time, all while working. Most of us work full-time jobs or go to school and things like that. So yeah, I'd never really thought about jumping into games journalism growing up, and it was on a whim, really. Like, I was at university the year before I joined, and they were hiring that year. But because it was my last year, I was like, no, I can't do this. I cannot jeopardize my university degree. I'll have to wait until the next one. Luckily, the following summer, they opened up, and I thought, I'll give it a go. So I wrote my first ever review for Earthbound, sent it in, and got it. So yeah, it's weird to say it was the only place, but like I studied English literature at university, and I'd studied film at college, so I've got like a bit of a background in like criticism and stuff. So I've always enjoyed writing. It was just that this was my calling, I suppose. I just didn't realize it. And like growing up, I grew up reading lots of video game journalism magazines and things like that. So yeah, it just spurred on. But it's amazing to see how different writing about video games is now than it was like 10 years ago even. Like, it's grown so much, and it's fun. It's really nice to be a part of, actually.
Yeah, it is really interesting you brought up like the evolution of games journalism, because like I remember right about 10 years ago, personality driven game journalism started popping up, and then now we're kind of getting to this, I want to say, more honest kind of journalism. And I know some people have an issue with that word, particularly because it means so different than others. But by that, I mean, we're true to ourselves, and we're not trying to pander to a larger audience with the hopes that we're going to have them keep coming back to read our articles or watch our videos and whatnot. And, and even on top of that, you mentioned, balancing aspects of reviews. I think that aspect of writing reviews is something that I feel is a more recent trend, because especially with, what happened with COVID last year and our higher awareness of mental health and stuff, like we're kind of applying a lot of these kind of disciplines that we've learned over the past year into a lot of our work, whether it's game journalism or otherwise. And I think that's really, truly fascinating. Unfortunately, like my next question is not really related to that. I'm more curious about, like, if you've noticed how your work has grown over these past 6 years. What would you think are like the elements of your writing that have improved and have really turned into your signature style?
I think it's good that you bring up the personality stuff, because I think it is that, and I think it's the same for everybody. Like, I don't think anyone can produce a piece of art without putting their own personality into it. And I think disingenuous isn't the right word, but like, you can't write an unbiased piece of media, I don't think, in any situation. Like, I feel like for the first couple of years that I was writing reviews, I was very conscious, and I still am conscious of like outside opinions and reviews and things like that, and people's influence on me. But what I've come to know over the years is like, what makes it a me review, and it will be things like examining very particular things that only I would pick out, or seeing how it fits into, oh gosh, I don't know, like anything to do with queer narratives or anything. Mental health is another great thing. And like, I definitely try and take things in a bubble and apply what's going on now. Not every time it has to be an appropriate situation.
Yes.
Like, what's going on now to what I write and what I'm playing. And yeah, I think one of the key pieces of my writing is that I'm much better at talking about things emotively than I am descriptively, if that makes sense. So like, I like to talk about how things make me feel. I don't love describing how things work sometimes. I'm good I can do it, absolutely. But like, the reason I think that Nier was so successful and I enjoyed doing that so much, not because I knew that game really well, but because that is a game about emotions and about feelings, and I could just draw on that the whole way through. And it really allowed me to be a bit more creative. And actually, these are the kind of things I love writing about. And yeah, like, it's just throwing my personality into it. Like, I stripped so much of it out of my early stuff because I was scared, but now I'm like, I've not really had too much criticism of it over the years, which is quite good. Again, because I think we curate such a good audience for our own content. Like, people who are interested in what we do follow us, and that's really great. But my personality's got to be in there somehow. And I feel like that's a really like generic answer. I'm sure like everybody would say that, but like, it's understanding like how and when to apply that. I think that's what I've gotten really good at. And yeah, I think so.
I think, to kind of riff off of what you said, it boils down to injecting the humanity in your work.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
And recognizing that, emotions and feelings are the most primal kind of aspect of any sort of storytelling medium. And I even consider, I'm pretty sure you'll agree with this, but I consider reviews as a form of storytelling, because you're kind of really conveying your own experience with a game in such a way that everyone else can kind of relate to it in a way, and like taking your journey with you. In fact, like one of the mission statements, oh God, thinking about mission statements, like I was reading a book about keeping things simple, and they started talking about mission statements, which is probably why I'm bringing this up right now. But like, one of the mission statements, well, there's only one mission statement for Backlog Battle, is all about conveying the gaming experience to your audience in such a way that they felt like they played the game, but they're just about to play the game, actually.
Yeah, that's a really lovely way of putting it, I think. Yeah.
To kind of describe where that analogy comes from, I'm a huge theme park fan, like in
Okay.
general. Like I go to theme parks. I used to live in California where we literally had like 4 theme parks there,
Yeah.
you know, and or actually probably more than that, to be quite honest. But you know, the whole vocabulary, especially at, you know, when you go to a Disney park, with being on stage, to cast members being backstage, like I felt like that was a vocabulary that I can even apply to something like reviews, because really, you know, what is going to a theme park to begin with? Well, it's literally, I don't want to say basic, but it's one of the first ways that you can interact with something fictional.
Yeah.
Because everything around you, like you go down Main Street, Liberty Square, or whatever equivalent you have in the country or continent that you're in with Disneyland, it's the same. It's a similar idea. It's a similar concept, because it's a physical virtual world that you can visit where everybody's playing a role. They're cast members, and there's some stuff in the backstage that you're not seeing, but that's not important. There's magic happening, quote unquote.
Yeah. It's show don't tell, isn't it? Like, you want to show them what's going on, but you don't want to tell them every single thing, do you? That's absolutely it. Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes I struggle with that sometimes, because I want to kind of pull the curtain sometimes for my fans, but then I kind of catch myself and be like, you know, it's more magical if they just see it like come out and not have to worry about like the behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, it goes back to like, oh gosh, I want everybody to get something out of it. And if I'm telling them the story and they find like one little snippet of that game from that review that they really want to, they're really fascinated by, or they want to challenge, then that's great. I feel like I've done my job. And like another thing that I've kind of learned about myself is like, or at least by writing reviews, is like, as much as I do write and I want other people to take away from stuff, like I'm also writing and producing content for me. Like I want to do it to develop both as a writer and as a person who empathizes with other people. Like if I go through these experiences and learn something from it myself, then that's great, whether it's about my writing style or something narratively about that game, about anything really. Like as long as I produce something I'm happy with, whether people like it or not, then I'm happy. And that's another way I think I've grown over the years, is just by developing that skill. Like even if I still get really nervous before a review embargo, extremely anxious about how people will perceive it or whether people will agree. But yeah, at the end of the day, as long as I get something out of it as well as other people, then absolutely, which might sound a little bit selfish, and I worry about that a little bit, but yeah, I just enjoy the act of writing as well, I think. And that's something I've learned to embrace. And so I hope other people like what I write and what you produce as well. Like I'm sure you do similar things. Like you wouldn't review something that you weren't like necessarily interested in, maybe. I don't know.
Oh yeah, like, I wouldn't. Like okay, just to kind of give you an idea, like I had a review code for Biomutant about a week ago, and I was like, oh my goodness. I played it on the PS5, I played it on the PS4 Pro, and finding out that it's not functioning well, and I'm like, oh no. Like we can go for another hour talking about Biomutant, my experience in it, but it's let's just leave it as it was. I struggled to find something positive to say about it, if only because there was so much that was not performing correctly.
That's so disappointing, because it seems so ambitious, and I'm sure it is extremely ambitious. I'd love for something like that to be ambitious and to work. And people who can find that ambition and love it, like I'm so jealous of people who can find that and like enjoy it. But like, yeah, sometimes it just doesn't work for people. And Biomutant is a good example, because like that's been one of the hot topics at the moment, and like scores are across the board for that, and it's really fascinating. Like it was something I was interested in, and I didn't want to review it, but I was certainly like, it was one of those things where I wanted to watch and see how things played out. And when the split came out, I was shocked. I was kind of expecting it to be like, I don't know, like good, but maybe just falling short. But no, it's like not. It's just over ambitious and doesn't hit. It's such a shame. Like I said again, like I don't want anything to be bad or disappointing. I always want stuff to be good. So
and I think that's kind of, you know, indicative of our job as reviewers, is that when we play games, we don't like writing critical reviews. We'd love it if we can just put a positive spin on everything. But the reality of it is, like, there's going to be clunkers and there's going to be winners. And, you know, and I think that's the thing that pains me the most, especially with Biomutant, because to me, you know, had they had maybe another year or something like that, or taken out certain features, they or just completely like nixed melee combat altogether, it could have probably been an incredible experience. But as you pointed out rightly, like, there sometimes overambition kind of can get us into trouble, which leads us to my next question. Have you ever worked on something that you felt was like overambitious, but like somehow you nailed it and you felt like really good, especially with like how people reacted to it?
Ooh. I don't know whether I would call it ambitious, but last year I did a character study on Aerith, and that was maybe the most personal piece I'd ever written at the time. Like, it was very much about me growing up and not liking Aerith as a character as a kid, and then like going through life and then revisiting Seven as a teenager or a 20-year-old and realizing that actually, as a human and as a feminist, I guess, I really learned to love her. And it was I was worried because obviously, you know, don't inject politics into your criticism kind of thing. And yeah, I was worried how people would react. And it got really, really good feedback from like everybody. And yeah, it was just me like putting myself out there a little bit more. And I was genuinely very surprised, and people were like, no, you really get her and you really write. Like, I'm really fascinated that you grew up with this character and you revisited and you reassessed your relationship with the game as a result of it. And then it was around the time that Remake came out. It was about a month afterwards, and then used that as a frame to be like, well, look, now everybody can get the full, like the real version that everybody misinterpreted for so long. And yeah, it was a genuine surprise that people reacted as well as they did to that.
Yeah. That's really awesome. Like, it's always great to, you know, work on something, you know, like really hard, and then all of a sudden when it comes out and people just react to it so positively. You know, I hate to kind of bring up World's End Club again, because, you know, that's actually probably one of my difficult reviews that I've ever done, not particularly because of the subject matter, but because of self-imposed limitation. Because I, cockily enough, I don't know if that's actually even a real word or something, but I told myself, like, okay, you're only going to have 2 days to do this review. And I've told you earlier, like, it takes me 5 days to make a review. And so, you know, I started writing a script about like 2 days ago. And by the time the second day came, I was still writing the script. And by the time the third day came, which is today, I was still adding stuff to the script. And keep in mind, Alana, this was like, the embargo is like 10 a.m. Pacific time. Oh, gosh, I added that paragraph around 8:30 in the morning. So if you can imagine, I had to record the audio and then pretty much piece everything together, you know, kind of finalize all this gameplay and everything you would see like in a review. And then, of course, when the review came, which, you know, by the time this comes out, you know, it's been probably weeks since then, but it's still ongoing in the present. I was just surprised, like, how many people like really responded positively to it. And bringing back the whole balance conversation we had earlier, like, you know, my wife actually watched the review and she said, like, yeah, this is actually a really well balanced piece. You were still being critical, but then it felt good to watch it. You know, and that's when I knew. I was like, oh, I did a good job, even for though I only worked on it for 2 days.
That's such a nice feeling, isn't it? It doesn't happen very often, but when it does, it's like, you know, block it away. It's good. Yeah, I felt like that with Nier Replicant, definitely. Like, I did it. I stressed over it. It took me a lot longer to write. A lot of people have different writing processes, and I never really write a review in one sitting unless I'm under pressure. Like 7 Remake, I had to write in a day because I had 4 days to play that game. And then the embargo we got it like 6 days early, but by the time it was a big game, so it took like 7 hours to download, and because I'm in UK time, it would have come in America morning time, but it was like 11 p.m. my time. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna have to download it overnight and start it tomorrow after work, and then power through it. And then I had less than a day to write the review because the embargo was a really strange morning time. And there's a lot about that game you cannot talk about. That was another game we had strict embargoes on. It was like, you can't talk about chapter 18, you can't do this, you can't do that. And it's like, how are you going to get around with it, especially when a lot of your issues are revolved around those bigger problems, and you just have to be really clever about it. And I wasn't unhappy with my 7 Remake review. It was good, but like Nier Replicant, I had a bit more time with. But I say I don't usually write reviews in one sitting. I just cannot. I have to write a draft, walk away, and then I'll go back to it. And 9 times out of 10, I probably rewrite half of it just because I've come away with a different perspective. And yeah, and you just have to gel it all together some way. I don't know how I manage it every time, but I managed it. But Nier Replicant probably took me the best part of like 2 days of like 2 long 8-hour sessions, maybe more to do, just because it was hard to balance like old opinions and like the whole game, because it's such a big, complicated game that a 2,000 word review will not cover everything. And you can't cover everything because embargoes, spoilers, all of the wonderful things that people should experience on their own. And yeah, it was just weighing on me so much that I was like, no, hang on a minute. Like, I had to rein it in. I was like, do what you do really well and just see where you go with that. And then I did it and submitted it, and it was fine. So, and then I came away reading it and was like, okay, actually, you did a good job. Like, you did fine. It's okay. You can rest now. You don't have to play Nier for 11 hours a day now. Like,
definitely. Yeah, rushing through it. Like, you got it for pre-release, right?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah.
I got it on the launch day. I was like, my goodness. Ooh. I'm not at that level yet with Square Enix. Let's put it that way. We're getting there, though. We're getting there.
That's one thing that you don't really understand, like from the outside, is like, a lot of companies you really have to build up that relationship with them, don't you? And we're lucky because we've been around for quite a long time. Like RPGFan is 22 years old this December. Wow. So it's been around for a really long time. And like, there are companies like Nintendo we don't have a brilliant relationship with. Like, we tend to get stuff either on the day or after, or sometimes not at all. And then like, we've got Atlas or Square Enix who are pretty generous, and well, Atlas and Sega now. Sega have been really good to us the whole time, but like, they'll give us something a couple of weeks early and be like, Nier Replicant we got 2 weeks early, but we had to produce a video out of it as well. So it was like, ideally you want it done like a week early, and I'm like, that's fine, I can do it because it's a game I know really well. And yeah, it still took a lot of time, but yeah, it's really difficult. Like, embargoes are really, really rough. I think we've said that a few times, but the restrictions and like, yeah, like playing a game in like 3 days is not enough time to digest it. And that's something else I've had to come to terms with, is like, even though like I'll write down how I feel as I'm going, and like I'll write the review a few days later after I've like called an opinion on and stuff, but like, I can look at a review I wrote 4 years ago and think quite confidently, yeah, my opinion's changed on that a lot. It's a really difficult, because I don't know whether people like read reviews, like they sometimes read reviews from RPGFan and go, oh, RPGFan gave it this score. And I'm like, no. The writer gave it that score. And it came up with Nier as well, because obviously I gave it a lower review. Scores are something I have a different problem with entirely. Like, what I love about your content is that you don't score stuff on a metric, and I think that's great. I mean, that's not the only thing that's great about your stuff, but like, I'm so interested in like reviews that make the words the focus, and you know, the voice the focus. I think that's the thing. Whereas if you immediately stick a score on, people go to the score and immediately go in with expectations, and then the minute the wording doesn't line up with their view of that number, it's immediately like, oh gosh, no, this is not a good review. And it's like, the number is so unimportant, and sadly it's just a way we get more hits, because like, it goes on to Metacritic and it goes on to OpenCritic, and people can find it that way. But like, yeah, I was trying to make a point about like, oh gosh, so someone on RPGFan, like the original Nier, even though it was like a messy game, it was not well received at the time it came out on the PlayStation 3. our 2 reviews of the original PlayStation 3 game are scored higher than my PS4 review of Replicant. I wouldn't have scored the original Nier the same as they did, but
Yeah.
immediately they were like, "Oh, you scored it. Why have you scored the better version lower?" And I'm like, "Oh," it doesn't even sometimes signify an answer because it's like, yeah, immediately, like, it kind of it doesn't upset me, but it was I this time I just kinda had to, like, laugh about it because I was like, I understand because at the same time, yeah, you would look at that and you go, "Oh, why is it lower?" But then it's changed. Things have changed, criticism have changed, writers have changed, and also, yeah, like, what do they feel about that original game?
I think that's kind of like the interesting thing about Metacritic as an entity, because they haven't actually learned that these critiques should be framed on an individual critic basis and instead of the actual outlet. And I think that kind of perpetuates this idea that the outlet has this kind of global perspective on this issue. Because like when I think about looking at other aggregators, right, like at Rotten Tomatoes, for example, like it's the critic, it's not the outlet. It's, you know, and because it's the critic, you can actually look at the history of that critic and what they rated to get a proper understanding of their perspective on a variety of different games. That to me is better than like, oh well, RPGFan said this. I'm like, no, it's not RPGFan. It's Alana. Like, it's her review, you know?
Yeah, it's so important to find writers and creators that you like, not that you agree with, but that you enjoy their prose. Like, that's the main thing. And like, I follow lots of writers on Twitter that I really agree with, even when they write stuff that I don't agree with. Like, I will read it and be like, I absolutely understand why you feel that way. And you've written it in such a good way that I'm like, yes, I will take that on board the next time I play this game or the next time I read about it and think, oh yeah, there's this piece. What does this mean to me in this situation now? And what did you think of it originally? Like, yeah, the only way you'll ever grow as like someone who plays video games or as someone who writes about them is by like listening to everybody else and just taking it in. And yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, like the only thing that matters is what you think personally. Like, I love it when people love what I love, but like ultimately, like if I'm interested in something and people don't like it, then I'll still go and seek it out probably and form my own opinion. I think that's the best thing about it is like just seeing how everybody differs.
Exactly. So unfortunately, we've kind of gotten to the end of the show, but Alana, there's been so many people who listen to the show. Like, I actually had somebody say like that they listen to the show with their child, like in the car during like when they're dropping off at school and stuff. Of course, professionals in the industry, non-professionals in the industry. I want to hear your perspective on like what kind of advice you would give somebody who is interested in getting into video games, and knowing especially that you are a reviewer and you have this passion for games that you've obviously demonstrated on this show. What advice would you give young people?
Gosh, that's a lofty question. I would honestly just say like go for it. I think there's not really any other advice I can give than say like if you see something that you're interested in, like go for it. Like it's just, I mean, regardless of what anybody thinks, I think it's interesting to just try things out, read a bit about it, and see, like, you might have friends you can talk to about it that you might want to find out things about. And like getting into video games can be quite daunting. Like we have someone on staff, funnily enough, and I'm going to do the obligatory Final Fantasy 14 reference now because we've got to do that. Someone on staff, one of their friends, has never played a video game before. Their first video game, this person's friend, is Final Fantasy 14. So if oh my god, and they main a healer. Yeah. I can't even play as a healer. Like I don't play as a healer. No.
Wow.
And it's quite impressive.
Yeah.
And so like, yeah, I think that you find like things that you're interested in naturally. So like, even if you're not sure about it, you've just got to give it a go and throw yourself in and just talk to other people about it and see, because I mean it's harder as a kid. Like I'm sure people at school like play things and you can find out about things through them, but I just think if you're interested, go for it. And I think I say everything really. Again, it's a very, very stock answer for me, but like, just throw yourself in. Like, there's nothing better than finding something new and learning something about yourself or about the world or about something, and learning, understanding and gaining empathy from that. I think you'll learn so much by interacting with new media, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. Definitely. I do really like that. So you did great. I could tell, like, you can tell I could kind of tell, like, you're saying, like, oh, I have a stock answer. I'm like, but sometimes that's not a bad thing, like, as with most things, you know? So
Exactly.
I think I can definitely empathize with that. So, Alana, where can we find you? I mean, obviously, I think some people know already because, like, we've repeated many times, but just in case, where can we find you?
So my writing you can find on rpgfan.com. I do all sorts of things. I'm a regular on the podcast Retro Encounter, which, if you've listened to every episode of this podcast, Mike Solosi was on a few episodes before me, and he is the showrunner and a very good friend of mine. So go and listen to those podcasts. We've got Random Encounter as well, which I'm regularly on. I've been on some Rhythm Encounter, which is on a bit of a break at the moment, but it is coming back. I've been on one or two of those. But if you want to find me more directly, really, I do have Twitter and Instagram. I use Twitter more than I do Instagram, and Instagram is way more silly and personal. But for most of my, like, video game related stuff, it's the same handle for both. So Twitter and Instagram, I am Alana Hagues on there.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for joining us, Alana. It's been a real pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you. I've had a really good time.
I told you the whole time. I've been trying to get you on the show.
I know, it's not out of, like, I promise you, it's not out of, like, avoidance. It's just generally being busy, generally being overwhelmed. And yeah, I'm so glad I've managed to make the time, and I would more than happily be back again and again. So absolutely.
I have some ideas. I'll probably pitch them to you and stuff like that.
I will look forward to them.
So for everybody out there who's listening, be sure to tune in next week, where we always have a new episode every Wednesday at 12 midnight Pacific time. That seems to be the best time for these shows. I don't know why, don't ask me, but we'll always have a brand new guest every single week and maybe a few new surprises. So until next week, guys, we'll see y'all later, and happy gaming.